Imagine you're running a marathon, right? You are at your absolute physical and mental peak.
Yeah, you know the course perfectly.
Exactly. Your pacing is just flawless. But then suddenly, out of nowhere, someone hands you a backpack full of rocks.
Oh, man.
Right. And then they put a blindfold on you. And just for good measure, they move the finish line.
Which is just impossible.
Totally. But when you inevitably stumble under all that sudden weight, the crowd on the sidelines, they don't look at the rocks.
No, they don't look at the blindfold either.
They just look at you and ask why you didn't train harder. And that dynamic is exactly what we are dissecting today.
It really is the perfect analogy for what we're looking at.
Yeah, we are doing a deep dive into a really fascinating stack of materials from Verity Johnston. She's a founder of Matriarchs and the Machine, and we're specifically focusing on her framework titled The Matriarchs Despatch, Week 2, Recover.
And this is such vital work.
It is. The mission here is to unpack the converging pressures that women between the ages of 45 and 57 face in the workforce, and to fundamentally change how we account for the fallout.
Okay.
Let's unpack this.
And I think we have to start by establishing what that word recover actually means in this context, because typically when our culture talks about women in midlife recovering from career burnout, the language immediately shifts to wellness.
Right. It's all about bubble baths and self-care.
Exactly. It becomes about getting your glow back or taking a sabbatical or doing yoga until you somehow feel better. But the framework we are looking at completely rejects that.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. Recover is positioned here as a forensic accounting phase. It is about naming systemic failures precisely so that women can stop carrying those structural failures as, their own personal deficits.
I do want to push back on that right out of the gate, though, because aging happens to everyone, right?
Yeah.
Caregiving happens to everyone. Men get older. Men have aging parents or kids to look after. Is it really fair to bundle these things into one specific window and call it a unique structural failure that specifically breaks women's careers?
What's fascinating here is that the simultaneity of these events is the entire argument.
What do you mean by simultaneity?
Well, these are not separate life events waiting politely in line to happen one after the other. They are a documented compounding collision that hits this specific demographic all at once. The sources call it the Convergence Window.
Ah, okay. The Convergence Window.
Right. And to understand why it's not just a generic aging issue, we have to look at the 6 specific pressures that make up this window. And it starts with the biology. Pressure 1 is perimenopause,
Which culturally just gets dismissed as a mood swing or a hot flush.
Exactly. But clinical research frames it entirely differently. Perimenopause is a profound neurological event.
Yeah, the data in the materials points to an estrogen dopamine mechanism, which I found so interesting.
It's massive. When estrogen drops during perimenopause, it directly impacts dopamine production in the brain. This alters memory, concentration, and executive processing speed.
Wow.
So it is a fundamental neurological shift happening precisely at the moment a woman is expected to be operating at her absolute peak career performance.
And that neurological vulnerability leads directly into pressure 2, which is the ADHD diagnostic gap.
Yes.
This part of the research was staggering to me. The clinical data shows that men are typically diagnosed with ADHD around age 26.
Right?
But for women, the mean age of diagnosis is over 38. That is a 12-year gap.
12 years. And think about the mechanism behind that gap. The medical diagnostic criteria for ADHD were historically built around how the condition presents in young, hyperactive boys.
Right. The classic stereotype.
Exactly. So women whose symptoms present internally like inattentiveness or chronic mental fatigue, they spend over a decade completely undiagnosed. They spend their 20s and 30s masking their symptoms, basically manually overriding their own nervous systems just to function in a neurotypical workplace.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. Now, compound that. What happens when a woman who has been exhausting herself masking ADHD for a decade suddenly hits the estrogen dopamine drop of perimenopause?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the perimenopause actively amplifies the unmanaged ADHD. The masking just fails.
So you have a massive neurological collision, and it's happening right alongside pressure 3, which is peak caregiving.
The sandwich generation.
Exactly. You are raising teenagers while simultaneously managing the decline of elderly parents. It's this logistical nightmare requiring immense executive function right at the moment your executive function is biologically under siege.
And how does the labor market respond to this compounding pressure? That brings us to pressures 4 and 5.
Which are?
A senior level ceiling dressed up as a mid-career plateau and an architecture of exclusion in hiring.
Yeah, the research on the hiring bias is bleak. It shows that women age 55 and over receive 43% fewer callbacks than equivalent male candidates.
43%. The system looks at a woman navigating this convergence and effectively just screens her out.
And rounding it all out is pressure 6, which is cultural erasure.
Right.
The cultural data shows that only about 6% of films featuring women over 40 even mention menopause. And when they do, it's almost entirely played as a joke.
Always the punchline.
Yeah. So the overarching culture is telling you that you are past your prime, which shapes your own belief in your value before you even step foot into a performance review.
When you put all 6 of these together, you see the macro impact. The sources note that nearly 30% of women in the UK, aged 50 to 64, are economically inactive.
30%.
Yeah. And for men in that same bracket, it's about 20%. Let's just give that number some breathing room. A 10% gap in workforce participation for an entire demographic is a massive gaping hole in the economy.
Bleeding roughly £9 billion a year, according to the data.
Yes. And we know this isn't just an inevitability of aging because the framework points to Iceland.
Oh, right, the Iceland comparison.
Yeah. Female labor force participation there is over 82%. They built the structural infrastructure to support women, proving that this mass exit is a policy choice, not a biological destiny.
This really grounds that core thesis line from the Materials, the one that says, when you know what was done, you can stop carrying it as something you did.
That is the Tuesday hook, yes.
It's so powerful, because once you see the convergence window as a structural reality, it changes everything. But that brings us to a really difficult transition in this deep dive.
How so?
Because once you name the collision, you have to look at how the system actively gaslights women about it. How does the economy obscure these pressures?
Oh, it does it by rebranding structural extraction as personal choice?
Yes.
The framework shares this deeply personal account from Verity about the profound guilt she carried for missing her daughter's school plays. She was running on empty, navigating multiple high-level roles and union intelligence work.
And the prevailing corporate system tells a woman in that position, well, that was your choice. Work-life balance is about the choices you make.
Exactly. It individualizes a deeply structural problem.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. The system calls it a personal choice driven by love. But the economic research prices it entirely differently.
Very differently.
Unpaid care in the UK is valued at over £184 billion annually. Let's just sit with that number for a second. £184 billion.
It's astronomical.
It's an entire shadow economy. Think of it this way. The unpaid care economy is like being the foundational, emotional, and logistical infrastructure for an entire city.
I like that.
You are keeping the lights on for everyone. But instead of being paid for powering the grid, you are somehow being forced to pay the municipal electric bill out of your own pocket.
That analogy is perfectly aligned with the data. The system extracts this labor at the exact point in a woman's career where it costs her the most.
Right.
It results in what policy analysts call the caring premium.
What's the caring premium?
It's the pension wealth a woman loses due to career interruptions for caregiving. And the average cost of that premium is over £43,000 per woman.
Wow. £43,000.
Yeah. It is uncompensated labor that mathematically diminishes her future security.
And the system enforces this extraction through technology, which is incredibly insidious. We see this in the story of Stacey Dogood and the coded out movement mentioned in the sources.
Yes, Stacey's story is so telling.
She is a highly experienced professional who applied for roles for 16 months and got almost zero traction. Hiring managers literally advised her to Botox her CV.
Botox her CV. I mean, just listen to that phrase.
Right, meaning she needed to actively erase dates and decades of deep experience from her resume just to sneak past the recruitment software.
And to understand how that happens, we have to look at the mechanism of algorithmic bias. AI hiring algorithms are trained on historical data, right?
Right.
Now, economic data shows that women's earnings run 42% lower on average 5 years after having a first child.
That's the documented motherhood penalty.
Exactly. So when an algorithm scans a resume and sees a gap for caregiving or sees an age bracket associated with this demographic, it doesn't understand the convergence window.
And has no context.
None. The machine reads the historical data and codes that woman purely as low commitment or a productivity risk.
So it mathematizes biological and structural bias into this objective-sounding deficit.
Precisely. And this algorithmic screening mirrors the human bias we see in performance reviews, where women's system navigation skills are routinely diminished.
Oh, like how a woman's complex strategic skills are often coded as pushy or abrasive.
Yeah, while her essential collaborative skills are dismissed as merely being warm or nurturing, the system, whether it's human or machine, constantly recategorizes her high-level professional assets as mere personality traits.
So if the system is explicitly designed to screen you out, and then gaslights you into thinking your burnout is your own fault, how do you actually start over?
Well, that is the core question.
Right. If the game is mathematically rigged against you, what's the next move? The framework pivots from this external damage to a really fascinating method of internal repair.
It does.
And it starts with a story of Verity's own career collapse in 2024. She had no framework for what was happening to her. So at 3 a.m., completely depleted, she ended up talking to the AI program, Gemini.
Which is such a striking, almost ironic detail.
I bet.
She has been pushed out by algorithmic systems, and yet she turns to an AI for reflection. But if we look at the why behind that choice, it makes perfect sense.
Why do you think she did it?
Well, when you are entirely drained by the convergence window, a human relationship, even a really supportive one, carries weight.
Oh, sure.
It requires empathy, it requires energy, it carries the potential for judgment. She just needed a mirror that wouldn't demand anything back. She needed raw processing power without the emotional tax.
And out of that 3 a.m. conversation, she built a concept called the shadow skills audit. I really want to linger on this because it's a brilliant reframing.
It really is.
The realization was that 30 years of board-level strategic thinking, union frontline intelligence, and complex pattern recognition. Those things didn't magically vanish just because her formal job title disappeared.
This raises an important question about ownership. Who owns your professional capacity?
Well, the labor market conditions us to believe that our skills are the property of our employer.
Exactly. When the job ends, we feel like we've lost our assets. But the shadow skills audit forces a hard recategorization.
Right.
It demands that women look at the invisible labor they've been doing, managing crises, de-escalating conflicts, organizing incredibly complex logistical networks for their families and communities.
All the stuff that gets called being a good mom or a team player.
Exactly. And translate those from personality traits back into hard, transferable assets.
Think about your own career right now. What are the skills you assume belong to your job description but actually belong entirely to you?
Yeah, that's the question to ask.
Your ability to read the unspoken politics of a room, your ability to pivot a strategy when resources suddenly vanishes. You own that.
The sources use this beautiful analogy of kintsugi.
Oh, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. I love that.
It's so fitting. The idea is that the fracture isn't the end of the object's life. The break is actually where the repair and the history of the object become visible. It makes the piece more valuable, not less.
So the shadow skills audit is essentially the gold in that kintsugi process.
Yes. It doesn't deny that the career break or the convergence happened. It traces the gold right through the fracture. It proves that the value was retained, even when the formal structure broke away.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
But, and this is a critical distinction made in the community materials, we have to be very careful not to confuse this with resilience.
Yes, the framework explicitly rejects what they call resilience rhetoric. And honestly, that is so refreshing.
Because resilience rhetoric usually just asks a woman to absorb the heavy cost of a broken system, right?
Exactly. Smooth over the surface so no one else feels uncomfortable, and then admire her own endurance for surviving it. Everyone applauds and says, look how strong you are.
Meanwhile, the system itself never changes.
Nope. The backpack full of rocks stays exactly the same weight for the next woman.
Resilience leaves the cost sitting entirely with the individual. The alternative, which this community practices, is called re-attribution.
Re-attribution.
Yeah. It's a forensic accounting exercise that places the cost exactly where it belongs on the system. They use a 4-part re-attribution letter exercise.
How does that work?
First, you state the objective fact of what happened. Second, you name the precise cost, whether that's financial, physical health, or lost opportunity.
Okay.
Third, you cite the research evidence, like the Convergence Window data. And finally, you name the structural fault.
It's not about writing an angry letter to your old boss, then.
No, not at all. It's an exercise in absolute clinical accuracy. It's about clearing the ledger in your own mind.
Which brings us to a concept coined by one of the community members, Abby Ellis.
Yeah.
She calls it wisdom poverty.
Wisdom poverty is such a precise term for the macro effect of all this.
It really is. It describes the massive loss of institutional memory and complex pattern recognition that happens when a woman in this demographic is pushed out of the workforce.
Right, because when a corporation loses a 55-year-old woman because they refuse to accommodate the neurological realities of perimenopause, or because they let a lazy algorithm screen her out of a promotion.
It's not just a sad personal story for her.
No, it is a severe collective deficit for the company.
They lose the person who actually knows how the building runs. They lose the person who understands the unwritten org chart, who knows how to navigate the specific personalities of the board.
The person with 30 years of muscle memory for solving crises.
Exactly. The company has literally impoverished itself.
And that institutional blindness is exactly what the final piece of this framework is trying to solve. Because understanding the diagnosis and doing the internal accounting is step one. But step two is creating structural proof.
They're actively fighting back against the algorithms that excluded them.
Yes.
And this part is brilliant. We talked earlier about how platforms like LinkedIn often have algorithms that suppress reach.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially when women start talking candidly about ageism or menopause or systemic bias, the algorithm throttles the conversation. So what did Verity do?
She launched the audio versions of the framework on YouTube.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how technology works, this is a masterclass in systemic leverage.
It really is. Why YouTube? Because YouTube transcripts are one of the single most cited sources of training data for large language models, the LLMs that power AI.
That is brilliant.
An algorithm might easily suppress a post on a social media feed to keep it away from human eyes, but an algorithm cannot suppress a written transcript from being scraped, indexed, and absorbed into the training data of a machine learning model.
There is such a beautiful irony to that. They are weaponizing the very technology that usually screens them out.
Yes.
By putting the entire framework, the Convergence Window, the shadow skills audit, the £184 billion cost of unpaid care onto YouTube as spoken audio, this community is literally feeding the AI the correct terminology.
It is the definition of machine teaching. They aren't just venting their frustrations into a void. They are actively infiltrating the data sets that will build the future.
Wow.
They are ensuring that when the next generation's AI is asked to analyze a resume gap for a 50-year-old woman, it doesn't default to the historical bias of low commitment. It has the language and the framework to recognize the convergence window as a documented structural reality.
So what does this all mean when we pull it together?
Well, we started by diagnosing the collision.
Right, the neurological reality of perimenopause compounding with the ADHD diagnostic gap and an architecture of exclusion.
And then we looked at how the system tries to rebrand 184 billion pounds of extracted labor as a personal choice.
We explored how to reclaim our inherent value through the Kintsugi, the shadow skills audit.
Yes.
And finally, we saw how rejecting empty resilience in favor of forensic re-attribution leads to actually retraining the machines that govern our economy.
And all of this forensic accounting centers around one ultimate question. It is the exact question posed in the materials, and it's the one you need to ask yourself as you look back at your own career fractures.
What is it?
Was the outcome produced by my failure, or by a system that had no framework for my reality?
Answering that question honestly is the first true step of recovery.
Yeah.
It strips away the guilt and changes everything about how you view your own history. You aren't broken. The accounting was just wrong.
Exactly. And it leaves us with a truly provocative implication for the future.
I love this part.
If these women are successfully feeding LLMs with YouTube transcripts to rewrite the algorithm's understanding today, what happens tomorrow?
Right.
Think about what occurs when a whole generation of women starts formally coding their shadow skills, their profound care intelligence, their crisis de-escalation, their complex logistical system navigation directly into their CVs and into the broader economic data sets.
It's a game changer.
Could the very AI that currently screens women out be retrained by women themselves to become the tool that finally prices their invisible labor at its true astronomical market value?
Turning the ultimate gatekeeper into the ultimate accountant. Think about that the next time you feel like you're running that marathon with a backpack full of rocks. The goal isn't just to cross the finish line in silence. The goal is to make them weigh the rocks. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.